Just moments ago, NBC releasing a clip from an interview it conducted this morning. President Trump is a guest on this Sunday's Meet the Press. In that interview, he discussed his dramatic decision, first to order airstrikes on Iran, but then 10 minutes before those strikes would take place, to decide to abort the mission.
They came and they said, "Sir, we're ready to go. We'd like a decision." I said, "I want to know something before you go. How many people will be killed? In this case, Iranians." I said, "How many people are going to be killed?" "Sir, I'd like to get back to you on that." Great people, these generals. They said, came back, said, "Sir, approximately 150. And I thought about it for a second. And I said, you know what? They shot down an unmanned drone, plane, whatever you want to call it. And here we are sitting with 150 dead people. That would have taken place probably within a half an hour after I said, go ahead. Yeah. And I didn't like it. I didn't think it was proportionate.
Trump administration plans to launch a major immigration crackdown this weekend. ICE planning raids in as many as 10 cities beginning Sunday, targeting thousands of undocumented family members. Tonight, some authorities are urging families, if ICE comes knocking, do not open your door. Here's ABC's Mary Bruce.
Tonight, Immigration and Customs Enforcement is preparing a mass roundup of migrant families that have already received deportation orders. Pre-dawn raids, reportedly known as Family Op, planned for this Sunday in as many as 10 major cities. The director of ICE speaking on ABC News Live.
One of the greatest pull factors for families to come here is they know once they arrive in the United States, they remain here untouched. We have to change that message.
These kinds of raids typically target criminals, not families. Houston's police chief sounding a warning.
The last thing we need is to evoke that kind of fear where people go further into the shadows and they fail to cooperate with law enforcement at the local level.
Outside the court, jubilation. Demonstrators saw the verdict as a step forward for all women in Spain. The Supreme Court overturned a ruling that many across Spain had seen as far too lenient. 5 men known as the Wolf Pack had been convicted of the lesser crime of sexual abuse after subduing a young woman and video recording non-consensual sex. They shared this video on their WhatsApp group, which they called The Pack, where they had also allegedly discussed plans to rape women. Their prior conviction caused outrage across Spain. Under Spanish law, the men could not be convicted of rape because there was no evidence the men used physical violence to subdue their victim. Now, this verdict could help change the way sexual offenses are convicted in Spain. Spanish acting Vice President Carmen Calvo tweeted that the ruling of the Supreme Court on the Wolfpack case recognizes the credibility of the victim and is in line with the government's proposal to change the law.
From Bengal, now let's get an update from Bihar, because remember, that is where the encephalitis horror continues there in the state, and the death toll has now risen to 145. 127 deaths have been reported in Muzaffarpur alone, which has been called as the epicenter of these deaths. But more than 600 children across 16 districts have been affected from what is being locally called as the brain fever or chunky fever. On Friday, 2-member central team visited the SKMC hospital, claiming that number of doctors treating children and beds have been increased to tackle this epidemic. Meanwhile, as all eyes remain on this hospital, several human skeletons were discovered in a forest near the hospital compound in Muzaffarpur. Human bones, broken skull fragments were found lying in this open area, and some even stuffed in sacks. The hospital authorities are trying to play down this incident, saying skeletons are of unclaimed bodies. Local residents claim that the bodies were burnt before CM Nitish Kumar's visit to the hospital.
Now, the issue of gender has also been raised in Belgium too, where the Constitutional Court there has ruled that the rights laws for transgender people must be relaxed.
It is not reasonably justified for persons whose gender identity is non-binary to be obliged to accept on their birth certificate a gender designation based on a choice of man or woman, which does not correspond to their gender identity as lived.
The previous law only allowed a legal gender change between male and female and didn't recognise any other genders. Any change could only also be made once. Since it came into force, more than 800 people have actually used that law. Well, the Constitutional Court of Belgium said that some of the norms established by the old law were not compatible with the country's constitution. So the court has now ruled that asking for a gender should either be removed from birth certificates or perhaps more options added. It's also removed the once-in-a-lifetime rule of gender changes, while people will no longer have to change their names too.
Protesters in Georgia have two key grievances against their government: its handling of Russia's occupation of 20% of Georgian territory and its heavy-handed response to the demonstrations, a show here of solidarity for those blinded by rubber bullets in Thursday's police crackdown. The violence began after opposition MPs heckled Russian deputies invited into Georgia's parliament. Georgia has had no diplomatic ties with Moscow since its war with Russia over South Ossetia in 2008. Later, clashes between protesters and police were the worst in 7 years since Georgia's governing party came to power, with more than 200 people injured and around 300 people detained. On Friday, journalists picketed Georgia's Interior Ministry. More than 30 of their colleagues were among those wounded.
Boris Johnson, the front-runner in the race to become Britain's next Prime Minister, is facing renewed scrutiny, following reports that police were called to a late-night domestic dispute at his London home. The Guardian newspaper says police were alerted by neighbours, who say they heard a woman screaming, followed by slamming and banging in the early hours of Friday. Police say they spoke to all occupants of the home and there was no cause for action. Johnson, who has not commented on the incident, resumes campaigning on Saturday, facing off against his rival Jeremy Hunt.
There's panic buying in Sana's old city after the UN World Food Programme said it would stop distributing food aid. Before the war, this market was a bustling focal point for vendors who sold fruits, vegetables and exotic spices. But 4 years of a Saudi-UAE-led war and diversion in aid supplies have caused an unprecedented food crisis. More than 850,000 people in the capital Sana'a are affected by the suspension in food aid deliveries, and Yemenis fear the situation could get much worse.
The suspension will harm us. The people will be affected by this. Not only the people of a village or a province or a city, but the entire nation.
The suspension of aid is literally a real war on Yemen. It literally means war.
Most of the people need food aid on a daily basis because the country is in a very bad economic condition and living expenses are high.
Well, some news about our neighbours now, and Zimbabwe risks being plunged into total darkness. The state-owned power utility is struggling to pay a debt of more than 580 million rand to Eskom. It also owes millions to Mozambique for electricity used over the past couple of years.
Zimbabwe is experiencing 19 hours of load shedding a day, a situation that's left most industries closed and people struggling. The country's energy minister says his government owes millions to Eskom and Mozambique's power utility.
As it is at the moment, we owe HCB and Eskom 83 million. Very huge amount of money.
The minister says the nation should brace itself for hard times because Zimbabwe's electricity supply authority is in shambles due to domestic and foreign debt.
If we pay, we'll be able to unlock something in the region of 400 But when you don't pay, you don't expect people to keep on giving you. We are not their children.